The Great Gig in the Sky from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. How can a wordless wail move us so? We usually sing words with our songs. Why do we tend to avoid or dislike situations in which words fail us? Like funerals, or nursing homes with Alzheimer's patients, or situations in which only foreign languages are spoken, yet we're supposed to help somehow. Or babysitting a pre-verbal child with colic. What do you say when there are no words? What do you do? These are questions of the ineffable, too great or extreme to be expressed in words. These are perhaps inscrutable questions, seemingly impossible to understand or interpret. However, like the country preacher boldly proclaimed, today we are going to F the ineffable and screw the inscrutable. Normally, for most of us, and according to personality, words come easily. Hey, how you doing? Can you believe this weather? Please pass the salt. But past a certain easy surface level, barriers to communication lurk. Allow me to name only a couple. Lack of a common language. I speak English fluently, but when I hear Arabic or Chinese, for example, I track nothing but gibberish because I don't understand those languages. Or it might be lack of vocabulary in a common language, either due to a limited knowledge or due to words not yet invented. Another one is intense emotion. Another, funeral. I never know what to say at funerals. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing because I don't want to make anything worse since it's already a bad situation. But I want to let my living friend know I care. I wish there were magic words to make things better, but there aren't. It's all pain. So the question becomes, when there are no words or the words are difficult and painful, how do we overcome the barriers and communicate authentically? The underlying condition required to overcome the barriers is strong emotion. If you don't feel an emotion strongly enough, you will not expend the time and effort necessary to surmount the barriers to communication. The opposite of love, by the way, is not hate. Hate and love are close to the same emotional temperature and can be too much swayed by understanding and knowledge of motivations and intentions. They too easily turn into the other one at the drop of a rumor. No, the opposite, although that's an inadequate two-dimensional word for something much more three-dimensional and nuanced, the opposite of love is much closer to apathy. I don't know and I don't care. Apathy is not bothered when there are no words. So let's assume you have love enough to want to overcome the barriers to communication when it's difficult. There's a saying school teachers bandy about. The student will forget whatever you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Emotion binds easily, even when the verbalized language remains foreign. So for the barriers of lack of a common verbalized language, communication can still get transmitted non-verbally through facial expression, body proximity, touch, and sound. To a frightened child, for instance, soothing sounds, a smile, and a gentle, non-sexual caress go a long way toward calming. Nonverbal communication, such as facial expression and tone of voice, whether or not we share a common verbalized language, comprises, like the underwater part of an iceberg, likely more than 80% of the message transmitted about feelings and attitudes. Technology has pushed us in the direction of communication by text. With texts, we don't have to wait until a person is actually available in real time to talk. We can just thumb some buttons and hang around until that person notices and replies to our outreach. We don't even have to spell things out, LOL. We must be cautious with texting because the crucial communicative aspect of nonverbal communication is missing. Emojis sometimes help, but only just a little. Sometimes there are no words or emojis to get across what we mean. Texts can't contain our depths of feeling. We need in-person, visually present, press-of-flesh communication to say what words cannot. In U.S. society in general, we seem to be a bit touch-averse. We readily shake hands. That's safe. But we're a bit skittish about closer social touch. Hugs, when they happen, are often perfunctory, very short, and when undertaken between men in particular, are accompanied with disclaimers such as, no homo. So no one will suspect, the claimant hopes, that any enjoyment that may have been derived from human contact. No one will suspect that any enjoyment that may have been derived from human contact. That doesn't count. In the current age of #MeToo and #TimesUp, nonverbal communication can be a treacherous path, rife with opportunities for missteps and miscommunication. Perhaps thus has it ever been. However, I urge my brothers and sisters to maintain clear verbal communication about nonverbal communication, because they're both too important to slight. Allow me to interject a personal disclaimer. I love to hug. Those of you who know me may well have called me the hug monster at one point, or, as I arrogantly and erroneously dubbed myself at another, the world's third best hugger. I've studied the benefits of hugging on a hormonal level and have given speeches about types of hugging. My natural assumption is a good, healthy, two-breath hug will make almost everyone feel better. I've painfully learned recently that not everyone appreciates hugs the way I do, and that I am not as good as I thought I was at reading appreciation levels, and that not everyone is good at saying no to a hug even when they'd really rather not. So, with my not always true assumption that everybody loves a good hug, that means I've hurt people unintentionally, and that hurts me, and I'm sorry. I hug men, I hug women, I hug everybody, because it's a way of communicating without words. When I hug, I hum. I don't know why, I just do. It's like a satisfied ah, except with my mouth closed. By the second breath of a two-breath hug, the huggy usually realizes this is a real hug, not a short, perfunctory one, and they relax into it. My hug, I hope, communicates authentic, gentle acceptance through both touch and sound. When I was in grad school, I was director of music in a church that had a greeting time every Sunday morning service. Talk about a welcoming church. That church had a hugging culture, so much so that the pastor would give a spiel each Sunday morning announcing the greeting time. If you're not a hugger, she'd say, you better get that hand right out there right away to let folks know you're a shaker. Otherwise, you're going to get hugged. And everyone would laugh, and a great time would be had by all, greeting by hugging or shaking while we talked and met new people until we all had to be corralled back into silence in an elevated emotional space so the rest of the service could proceed. Back to the barriers. I don't know anyone who enjoys going to funerals. They're just sad affairs. Sure, we call them celebrations of life, but the fact is, someone we cared about just died and is no longer here with us, is no longer vital and laughing and witty and however we remember. And usually someone else has been left bereft and devastated, and now we are supposed to show up and do what? Perform wizardry to make everything all good? All the usual things to say are cliches. It's so hard. It would be easier not to even show up, to just avoid the pain. Remember, the underlying requirement to overcoming barriers to communication is strong emotion. Let's assume you loved either the one who died or the one remaining enough to work to get over the obstacles. The obstacles are, what do I say or do? And what if I say or do the wrong thing and make it worse? Know this, if you're truly coming from a place of love, even if you muff something, it'll likely be fine in the long run. However, here are 3 general practical tips that might give you guidance and help you rest easier. Number 1, don't babble. Some people don't know what to say, but they also don't know when to be silent. So they babble on, ramble on, blather on about nothing important. Don't be that person. Silence may be awkward, but silence in a time like this is golden. Number 2, just be there. The fact that you showed up means you cared enough to overcome the awkwardness that funerals and deaths entail. Your presence itself is a gift. And number 3, offer some sort of eye contact and touch. Depending on the chemistry between you and the bereaved, the comfort level you both have with touch, and the amount of eye contact you feel comfortable with, communicate your care directly into their eyes with longer than normal eye contact. Touch can be a lingering hug, or just a light touch on the arm or shoulder or a handshake. But remember, the bereaved is in pain and is trying to suck comfort from wherever comfort might be offered. Offer what you can. then move on. Everplans.com, an online firm to keep records in one place, has words of wisdom, although some are cliches, on possible things to say. I'm sorry for your loss. You're in my thoughts, or I'm thinking of you. He or she was a wonderful person. I will miss him or her. This must be so hard for you. I love you. When you're ready, I'd like to get together to learn more about what whoever, the person who died, was like. These are neutral, non-sectarian, non-offensive things to say that are likely to be welcomed. They are words to say, but not speeches. Everplans also has 3 good rules to follow when figuring out what not to say. Number 1, don't deny that the person who died is dead. You might be surprised how many people try to do that, like my mom. Number 2, don't deny that the bereaved is in emotional pain. And number 3, don't deny that this death may change everyone's lives. They also have examples of things not to say. Thing 1, I know how you're feeling. Really? Really? Just no. Thing 2, she or he is in a better place. Unless they've sent back pictures that you have personally seen, do not make this claim. Thing 3, how are you doing or holding up? The authentic answer to this is, like hell, jerk, duh. Even if well-meaning, this is a thoughtless question. Don't ask it and try to force anyone to live up to society's image of the strong, brave, suffering bereaved. Thing 4, now you can start moving on with your life. It's not your call to say how their grieving process proceeds. Thing 5, I just don't know what I would do if my deceased relationship to the bereaved died. Well, that's probably true, but exceedingly unhelpful to whoever is currently grieving. Keep it to yourself. Thing 6, at least the death was quick, so there wasn't pain, or slow, so you had a chance to say goodbye. It's not your job to be an optimist at the moment. Let the bereaved's grief process run its course in whatever way it does. And thing 7, don't worry, you'll feel better soon. Well, maybe or maybe not. Don't put pressure on an individual's grieving process. So I hope those are common sense to you. Don't do those things. The Great Gig in the Sky that we heard at the beginning was about the transition from life to death, without words. Now we've considered ways of offering comfort or not at a funeral. I'd like to close with a personal story from closer to the beginning of a life. In 1997, my ex and I traveled to Siberia to pick up our just-turned-2 second daughter, Katya, from an orphanage in Sosnovoborsk, where she lived all her life up until then. She understood Russian, but only spoke a few words, and knew no English. We knew only a few words of Russian. After an exhausting week of official requirements, we were finally on the plane back home on the first long leg from Moscow to Frankfurt. Katya, who was frightened of men since there were none in the orphanage, clung to Mom and screamed if I took her. Mom, sitting in the middle section of a huge 2-aisle plane, was exhausted. Katya, also exhausted, refused to give in to sleep because there was too much new stuff to see. She was hypervigilant, and every time she nodded off, she would snap her tiny head back up so as not to miss anything. Mom finally moaned, "You have to take her, I'm exhausted." "But she'll scream," I pointed out. "But you have to take her," she said. So I did. She screamed. I took her back to the back galley, where she screamed and promptly wriggled free from my arms and ran, screaming, all the way to the middle of the plane. Stopping to stare, fascinated, at the middle galley, she finally allowed me to catch her up, but screeched like she was being tortured as I hauled her with renewed determination she would not get free again back to the back galley. I had no apologies ready in either German or Russian to the grumbling passengers, and no words for Katya to assure her I would not harm her either as she struggled to get free from my embrace. So I did the only thing I could think of. I began humming to her the Brahms lullaby. As I hummed, squeezing her to my chest resonating, the tune calming, she began fighting me less vigorously, screeching less loudly. I kept a firm grip on her tiny body and began a second iteration. By the time I was halfway through the second time, she was sound asleep. What do you say when there are no words? You communicate as best you can non-verbally, by caring enough to want to get the message across.